The first hazmat suit appeared at exactly 11:47 a.m., its yellow fabric gleaming under the autumn sun as it emerged from the black SUV. Then another. Then 10 more. Students pressed their faces against the windows of Jefferson University's biology building, watching in stunned silence as FBI agents swarmed the campus like an army preparing for war. The air itself seemed to thicken with dread. "What the hell is happening out there?" whispered Marcus Chen, a sophomore clutching his chemistry textbook so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Nobody answered because nobody knew. The only certainty was that something terrible had happened. Something that required men in full protective gear to invade their peaceful academic sanctuary. Inside lecture hall, B, 17-year-old Jamal Washington sat perfectly still, his wheelchair positioned at the front table, where his biology project hummed quietly beside him. The aerobic composting system he'd built from recycled materials looked innocent enough, a clear plastic chamber filled with organic waste, connected to tubes and sensors that monitored oxygen levels and temperature. For 3 months, he'd watched bacteria break down food scraps into rich, dark soil. His project proposal had been titled Sustainable Waste Management Through Controlled Bacterial Decomposition, and he dreamed of presenting it to the state science fair judges with the same passion that had driven him through countless late nights in his garage workshop. The wheelchair had been part of his life since birth, a result of spina bifida that left his legs weak, but his mind razor sharp. His mother, Dr. Angela Washington, a microbiologist at the local hospital, had encouraged his fascination with bacterial processes from an early age. "Bacteria aren't the enemy, baby," she'd often told him while reviewing his homework. "They're some of the oldest, most successful life forms on Earth. We need to understand them, not fear them." Jamal had absorbed every word, every scientific principle, every ethical consideration his mother shared. His project represented months of careful research, precise calculations, and meticulous safety protocols. The bacteria he used were common soil microorganisms, completely harmless to humans. He documented everything in a detailed research notebook, including pH measurements, temperature logs, and photographs showing the decomposition process over time. The morning had started like any other science fair day. Students arrived early, setting up displays and practicing presentations. The judges, a mix of university professors, industry professionals, and science teachers, moved from table to table, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Jamal had already presented to 2 judges, both of whom seemed impressed by his thorough understanding of aerobic decomposition and its environmental applications. Then Karen Mitchell arrived. She swept into the hall like a storm front, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor. As the mother of Brandon Mitchell, a 17-year-old from the exclusive Fairview Academy, Karen had made her presence known at every academic competition for the past 4 years. She wore her son's achievements like jewelry, constantly reminding anyone within earshot of his perfect SAT scores, his early admission to Princeton, his inevitable future as a biomedical engineer. Brandon's project sat 3 tables away from Jamal's, a sleek digital presentation about theoretical gene therapy applications, complete with computer-generated models and expensive equipment borrowed from his father's pharmaceutical company. It was impressive in its scope and ambition, but it lacked the hands-on experimentation that characterized true scientific inquiry. Brandon himself seemed uncomfortable with his mother's constant hovering, occasionally glancing apologetically at other students when she criticized their work within earshot. Karen's eyes locked onto Jamal's project with laser focus. She approached slowly, her gaze sweeping over the bacterial chamber, the monitoring equipment, the detailed charts showing decomposition rates over time. Her expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion, to something darker. A cold calculation that made Jamal's stomach clench with unexpected anxiety. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What exactly is this experiment supposed to be?" Jamal straightened in his wheelchair, offering the same polite smile he'd given the previous judges. "It's an aerobic composting system that uses naturally occurring bacteria to break down organic waste. The process produces nutrient-rich soil while reducing landfill burden and methane emissions." "Bacteria." Karen's voice dripped with distaste. "You're growing bacteria in an enclosed system. Here, with all these students around." "Yes, ma'am. But they're completely safe soil bacteria. Common microorganisms found in any garden or compost pile. I've followed all safety protocols. And my mother, she's a microbiologist, helped me design the containment system to exceed standard laboratory requirements." Karen's eyes narrowed as she leaned closer to examine the project display. She read his research summary with increasing agitation, her lips moving slightly as she processed the technical language. "This says you're studying rapid bacterial proliferation and optimal growth conditions. That sounds like you're trying to weaponize these organisms." The accusation hit Jamal like a physical blow. Several nearby students turned to stare, their conversations faltering as Karen's voice rose. "Ma'am, I'm studying decomposition rates to optimize composting efficiency. It's about environmental sustainability, not what you're suggesting." "Don't lecture me about what I'm suggesting, young man." Karen's voice carried across the hall now, drawing more attention. "I know suspicious activity when I see it. This entire setup looks like something designed to cultivate dangerous pathogens. Where are the proper containment protocols? Where are the safety warnings?" Professor Helen Martinez, the science fair coordinator, hurried over as Karen's accusations grew louder. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes, there's definitely a problem." Karen pointed an accusatory finger at Jamal's project. "This student is conducting what appears to be biological weapons research in a public space with inadequate safety measures. I demand to know why this was approved for a high school science fair." Professor Martinez examined the project display, her expression patient but firm. "Mrs. Mitchell, I reviewed this project personally. Mr. Washington's research involves standard aerobic bacteria, commonly used in waste management applications. His methodology is sound, his safety protocols are appropriate, and his results demonstrate genuine scientific inquiry." "I don't care what you think you reviewed." Karen's voice rose to near shouting levels. "This is clearly biological weapons research disguised as a school project. Look at this equipment. Look at these bacterial cultures. This is exactly the kind of thing terrorists use to develop bioweapons." The word terrorists seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Conversation stopped entirely. Students stared in shocked silence as Karen continued her tirade, her accusations becoming more wild and inflammatory with each passing second. Jamal felt heat rising in his cheeks, a combination of embarrassment, anger, and growing fear as he realized the seriousness of what was happening. "Ma'am, please," he said quietly. "If you'd like to see my research documentation, I have detailed logs showing—" "I don't want to see anything," Karen snapped. "I want this dangerous experiment removed from this building immediately. And I want an investigation into how something like this was allowed to happen in the first place." Professor Martinez stepped between Karen and Jamal's table, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and stop making unfounded accusations. Mr. Washington has done nothing wrong, and his project poses no safety risk to anyone in this building." Unfounded. Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. Lady, I've seen enough crime shows to know bioterrorism when I see it. This kid has built a bacterial weapon, and you're all too politically correct to admit it because you're afraid of being called racist. The accusation of racism hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several African American students and parents who had been quietly observing the confrontation now stepped closer, their expressions shifting from confusion to outrage. Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the arms of his wheelchair, feeling the weight of dozens of stares and the crushing realization that his scientific passion had somehow become twisted into something sinister and threatening. That's enough. Dr. Angela Washington's voice cut through the tension as she appeared at her son's side, having arrived early to watch his presentation. Her hospital ID badge caught the light as she positioned herself protectively next to Jamal's wheelchair. I'm Dr. Washington, a microbiologist at St. Mary's Hospital, and I helped design this project. Every aspect of this research meets or exceeds standard laboratory safety protocols. Karen whirled to face her, eyes blazing with righteous fury. Oh, so you're in on this too? A mother-son bioterror team. That's even worse. What did you just say to me? Dr. Washington's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, her professional composure cracking as maternal instinct took over. The confrontation might have escalated further, but Karen suddenly turned away from the group and pulled out her cell phone. Her voice carried clearly across the silent hall as she dialed 911. Emergency services. Yes. I need to report a biological weapons threat at Jefferson University. There's a student here with what appears to be a bioweapon, disguised as a science project. He's growing dangerous bacteria in an uncontained system, and the school is trying to cover it up. Yes. I'll hold. The next few minutes passed in a surreal blur. Professor Martinez frantically tried to convince Karen to hang up, explaining that she was reporting a false emergency. Other parents began pulling their children away from Jamal's table, casting suspicious glances at his project. Brandon Mitchell stood frozen behind his own display, his face pale with embarrassment and horror as he watched his mother's public breakdown. "Mom, please stop," he whispered, but Karen was too deep in her delusion to hear him. "No, I will not calm down," she shouted into the phone. "I'm reporting a clear and present danger to public safety. This is exactly the kind of domestic terrorism the FBI warned us about. Send someone immediately before this boy releases his biological weapons." Dr. Washington pulled out her own phone, calling the university's administrative office to report the false emergency call and request security assistance. But it was too late. Karen's 911 call had already triggered a cascade of emergency protocols designed to respond to potential bioterror threats with maximum force and minimum delay. Within 15 minutes, the first responders arrived, not campus security or local police, but federal agents in full protective gear, treating the university like an active bioweapons site. The speed and scale of the response revealed just how seriously post-9/11 America took any mention of biological threats, regardless of the source or credibility of the initial report. The evacuation began immediately. Students and parents were herded out of the building through designated exit routes, while agents in hazmat suits secured the area around Jamal's project table. News helicopters appeared overhead within the hour, their cameras capturing dramatic footage of the emergency response that would soon be broadcast across the nation. Jamal found himself separated from his mother and surrounded by federal agents who treated him not as a teenage science enthusiast, but as a potential terrorist. They photographed his project from every angle, bagged his research notes as evidence, and questioned him about his materials, methods, and motivations with an intensity that left him shaking. "Son, "I need you to tell me exactly what you were trying to accomplish with this experiment," said Agent Rebecca Torres, her voice muffled by the respirator in her hazmat suit. "Were you working alone? Or did someone help you design this system?" "I was studying decomposition for environmental applications," Jamal repeated for the dozenth time, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom helped me with the safety protocols. It's just compost bacteria. It's not dangerous." "We'll let the lab determine what's dangerous, son. Right now, I need you to think very carefully about whether there's anything else you want to tell me about this project or the people who helped you." The implication was clear. They suspected him of lying, of hiding some sinister purpose behind his innocent-seeming research. As a 17-year-old with a disability who had never been in trouble with any authority figure beyond an occasional late homework assignment, Jamal felt completely overwhelmed by the situation, spiraling beyond his control. Meanwhile, outside the quarantine zone, news crews interviewed Karen Mitchell as she stood in front of the sealed university building, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the chaos she had unleashed. She spoke with the confident authority of someone who believed she had just saved the nation from a terrorist attack. "I knew something was wrong the moment I saw that bacterial setup," she told the reporter, her voice filled with righteous conviction. "As a concerned parent, I couldn't just stand by and watch while a potential bioweapon was being developed right under everyone's noses. Thank God I had the courage to speak up before something terrible happened." The news coverage exploded across social media and cable television networks. "Bioscience, fair threat," began trending on Twitter within hours, accompanied by increasingly wild speculation about the nature of Jamal's project and the adequacy of school security measures. Stock prices for biotech companies plummeted as investors panicked about potential regulatory crackdowns. University officials canceled classes and sent students home while federal investigators combed through every inch of the biology building. Dr. Angela Washington watched the media circus from the parents' holding area, her heart breaking as she saw her son's face on television next to graphics labeled "Bioterror Suspect." Years of careful nurturing, of encouraging his scientific curiosity and building his confidence despite his physical challenges, seemed to crumble in real time as the narrative spun completely out of control. "This is insane," she told Professor Martinez, who sat beside her looking equally devastated. "Jamal's project is undergraduate-level microbiology. The bacteria he's using are so common, you could find them in any backyard garden. How did we get to federal agents in hazmat suits?" "One person's prejudice and paranoia," Professor Martinez replied grimly. "Combined with a post-9/11 security apparatus that's designed to treat any biological threat report as credible, until proven otherwise. The system worked exactly as it was supposed to, which is the most terrifying part of all this." Congressional representatives began issuing statements before the lab results were even completed. Senator Patricia Hawkins, chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Biosecurity, announced emergency hearings on science fair safety protocols. "We cannot allow our children's educational activities to become laboratories for potential terrorists," she declared in a hastily arranged press conference. "If our security measures are so inadequate that a high school student can develop biological weapons under the guise of environmental research, then we need immediate and comprehensive reform." The political firestorm intensified when footage emerged of federal agents questioning Jamal in his wheelchair, surrounded by hazmat-suited investigators. Civil rights organizations condemned the treatment of a disabled teenager as a terrorist suspect based on a single parent's complaint. Counter-protests formed outside the university, with some groups demanding stronger security measures and others calling for an end to racial profiling in emergency responses. Brandon Mitchell found himself caught in the middle of a nightmare his mother had created. His Princeton acceptance letter, which had arrived just 2 weeks earlier, suddenly felt meaningless in the face of national controversy surrounding his family. Classmates at Fairview Academy avoided him in the hallways, whispering about his crazy mom and the bioweapon scandal. He tried repeatedly to call Jamal's family to apologize, but their phones had been disconnected after receiving hundreds of threatening calls from strangers who had seen the news coverage. "Mom, you have to make this stop," he pleaded with Karen as they sat in their living room, watching yet another news report about the ongoing investigation. "Jamal's a good guy. His project was just about composting. You've ruined his life over nothing." Karen's response revealed the depth of her delusion. "Brandon, you're too naive to understand what we're dealing with here. That boy and his mother are obviously part of some kind of terrorist cell. Why else would they be developing biological weapons? The FBI will prove I was right to report them." "It's not a biological weapon, Mom. It's bacteria that eat garbage. I've seen the same kind of experiments in our school lab." "Don't raise your voice at me, young man. When the investigation is complete, everyone will see that I prevented a major attack on American soil. That disabled boy was the perfect cover for a bioterror operation who would suspect a teenager in a wheelchair." The twisted logic of Karen's reasoning revealed prejudices that ran far deeper than simple misunderstanding. In her mind, Jamal's race, disability, and scientific aptitude had combined to create a profile of suspicion that justified any level of scrutiny or destruction. She had convinced herself that her actions were heroic, that she was protecting the community from a threat only she had been brave enough to identify. 3 days into the crisis, the first lab results began to arrive. As Dr. Washington had insisted from the beginning, Jamal's bacterial cultures contained nothing more dangerous than common soil microorganisms used in agricultural and waste management applications. The FBI's biological weapons experts found no trace of engineered pathogens, no evidence of weapons-grade modifications, no indication of anything beyond a teenager's genuine interest in environmental science. But the vindication came with a devastating revelation. FBI computer forensics specialists, examining all digital files related to the science fair, discovered that someone had accessed and modified Jamal's project submission after it had been approved by the University Review Committee. The original description, which clearly outlined the environmental benefits of aerobic composting, had been altered to include alarming phrases like rapid bacterial proliferation, weaponization potential, and biological agent cultivation. The digital trail led directly to Karen Mitchell's home computer, where investigators found evidence of multiple unauthorized access attempts to the university's science fair database, using her son's student login credentials, which she had obtained by monitoring his computer usage. Karen had systematically edited project descriptions to make Jamal's research appear more sinister than it actually was. Agent Torres reviewed the evidence with a mixture of professional disgust and personal anger. She had participated in genuine bioterror investigations, had seen the real damage that biological weapons could inflict on civilian populations. To discover that she had mobilized federal resources, traumatized an innocent family, and sparked a national panic based on one woman's manufactured evidence felt like a violation of everything she had sworn to protect. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said during the confrontation at Karen's suburban home, her voice cold with controlled fury. "You are under arrest for filing false reports to federal authorities, cyber crimes against educational institutions, and interfering with a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right." Karen's world collapsed with stunning speed. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists as neighbors emerged from their houses to watch the arrest, cell phone cameras capturing every moment of her downfall. The same news crews that had celebrated her as a vigilant citizen, now documented her walk of shame to the federal detention center. Brandon Mitchell watched his mother's arrest from his bedroom window, tears streaming down his face as he realized the full extent of her betrayal. She hadn't just destroyed Jamal's life out of prejudice and paranoia. She had committed federal crimes to manufacture evidence supporting her delusions. His Princeton acceptance, his family's reputation, his entire future had been sacrificed on the altar of his mother's racism and narcissism. The congressional hearings that Senator Hawkins had promised took place 3 weeks later. But their focus had shifted dramatically. Instead of examining science fair security protocols, the Senate Subcommittee on Biosecurity found itself investigating how a single false report had triggered such a massive and damaging federal response. Jamal Washington sat at the witness table in his wheelchair, no longer the suspected terrorist, but a symbol of everything wrong with America's approach to homeland security. His testimony, delivered in a clear, steady voice, despite the trauma he had endured, became a masterclass in both scientific communication and moral courage. Senators, my project was designed to study how natural bacterial processes can help reduce environmental waste, he began, his research notebook open before him. I used common soil bacteria that pose no threat to human health. Every safety protocol was followed. Every procedure was documented. Every result was verified by qualified professionals. Senator Hawkins leaned forward, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and genuine concern. Mr. Washington, I want to apologize to you and your family for the ordeal you've endured. But help us understand, how do we prevent this kind of false alarm from happening again while still maintaining appropriate security measures? Ma'am, I think the problem isn't with security measures. It's with the assumption that certain people are more likely to be threats than others. My project was identical to dozens of others submitted to science fairs across the country every year. The only difference was who was presenting it and who was evaluating it. The hearing room fell silent as the implications of Jamal's words sank in. He had managed to articulate, with devastating clarity, the racial bias that had turned a routine science fair into a national security incident. His composure under questioning, his thorough understanding of his research, and his gracious response to the trauma he had suffered made Karen Mitchell's accusations appear even more monstrous in retrospect. Dr. Washington testified about the personal cost of the false accusations, describing death threats, job security concerns, and the psychological impact on her son. Jamal has loved science since he was 5 years old, she told the committee, her voice breaking slightly. After this experience, he asked me if pursuing scientific research was worth the risk of being treated like a terrorist. That question should haunt all of us. Professor Martinez provided expert testimony about the university's review process, explaining how Jamal's project had been evaluated by multiple qualified scientists before being approved for the fair. She also revealed the extent of Karen Mitchell's digital intrusions, showing how the false evidence had been systematically manufactured to support predetermined conclusions about a student's character and intentions. The congressional hearings sparked a national conversation about racial bias in emergency response procedures, the vulnerability of educational institutions to cyber attacks, and the responsibility of parents to model appropriate behavior during their children's academic competitions. Editorial boards across the country condemned Karen Mitchell's actions while praising Jamal's dignified response to his ordeal. Federal prosecutors, meanwhile, built an airtight case against Karen for multiple felony charges. The evidence of her computer intrusions, combined with recorded 911 calls and witness testimony about her behavior at the science fair, painted a picture of premeditated fraud designed to destroy a teenager's reputation and educational opportunities. Her defense attorney's attempts to portray her as a concerned parent who had simply made an error in judgment were undermined by the digital trail, showing months of planning and deliberate evidence manipulation. The trial, when it finally began 6 months later, became a media sensation for entirely different reasons than the original incident. Karen Mitchell, once celebrated as a vigilant citizen protecting her community from terrorists, now sat in a defendant's chair facing decades in federal prison. Her fall from suburban martyr to convicted felon served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked prejudice and the power of social media to amplify false narratives. Jamal Washington, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity in the scientific community. His composting project, finally able to be evaluated on its actual merits, won multiple awards including the National Young Scientist Achievement Award and a full scholarship to MIT. Research institutions across the country offered him internship opportunities, and his work on bacterial decomposition processes was cited in academic papers about sustainable waste management. More importantly, major science foundations used Jamal's case to launch initiatives supporting underrepresented students in STEM fields. The Jamal Washington Science Education Fund provided grants for disabled students pursuing research projects, while the National Science Foundation implemented new anti-bias training for science fair judges and administrators. Brandon Mitchell, whose mother's crimes had initially devastated his college prospects, found unexpected redemption through his public apologies and advocacy work. Princeton University, after initially rescinding his acceptance due to the scandal, reversed their decision when he demonstrated genuine remorse for his mother's actions and committed to working with civil rights organizations on campus. His essay about learning to recognize and confront family prejudice became a powerful testimony about personal growth and moral courage. The sentencing hearing for Karen Mitchell drew protesters from both sides of the political spectrum. Civil rights advocates demanded maximum penalties for what they saw as a racist attack on a disabled teenager, while some conservative groups portrayed her as a misguided patriot who had been overly zealous in protecting national security. The federal judge, however, focused on the facts of the case rather than political interpretations of her motives. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Patricia Coleman said during sentencing, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "You have been convicted of filing false reports to federal agencies, unauthorized computer access, and conspiracy to interfere with educational activities. These crimes caused massive disruption to federal resources, traumatized an innocent family, and damaged public confidence in our emergency response systems." Karen stood to receive her sentence, no longer the confident suburban mother who had dominated news coverage 9 months earlier. Her legal battles had cost her family their home, her husband had filed for divorce, and her community had ostracized her as thoroughly as she had once tried to ostracize Jamal Washington. However, Judge Coleman continued, the court also recognizes that your actions, while inexcusable, appear to have stemmed from prejudice and paranoia rather than any genuine intent to harm national security. You will serve 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, during which you will perform 500 hours of community service with organizations serving disabled youth and students of color. The sentence was seen as appropriately severe by most observers, though some civil rights advocates had hoped for a longer prison term. More significant than the legal punishment, however, was the complete destruction of Karen's social standing and the vindication of everything Jamal Washington had represented from the beginning. On the first anniversary of the science fair incident, Jamal returned to Jefferson University to present his research at a special symposium on environmental science and social justice. The same lecture hall where federal agents had once treated him as a terrorist now hosted a celebration of his achievements and a discussion of lessons learned from the crisis he had unwittingly sparked. His presentation, titled Decomposition and recomposition science, society, and the power of truth, drew an audience of students, faculty, government officials, and civil rights leaders. He spoke not just about bacterial processes and environmental sustainability, but about the broader implications of his experience for American society and scientific education. Science is about testing hypotheses, gathering evidence, and following the data wherever it leads, he told the packed auditorium, his voice strong and confident despite the trauma he had endured. What happened to me last year was the opposite of science. It was prejudice masquerading as protection, fear disguised as patriotism, and hatred wrapped in the flag of community safety. The audience listened in rapt attention as Jamal described his current research projects, his plans for graduate school, and his commitment to encouraging other underrepresented students to pursue STEM careers despite the obstacles they might face. His story had evolved from tragedy to triumph, from victimization to advocacy, from personal nightmare to national inspiration. Dr. Washington watched from the front row, tears of pride streaming down her face as she saw her son transformed from the frightened teenager questioned by federal agents into a poised young scientist and social justice advocate. The bacteria that had once been portrayed as bioweapons now represented hope for environmental sustainability and educational equity. Professor Martinez, who had been promoted to Dean of Sciences, partly due to her exemplary handling of the crisis, introduced Jamal's presentation by reflecting on how the incident had changed university policies and procedures. "We learned that good intentions are not enough," she told the audience. "We must actively work to create educational environments where all students can pursue their scientific passions without fear of persecution or prejudice." The symposium concluded with the announcement of new federal grants supporting inclusive science education programs, funded partly by fines collected from Karen Mitchell's cybercrimes conviction. The money would go toward scholarships, research opportunities, and anti-bias training for educators across the country, turning the destructive energy of one woman's prejudice into positive change for thousands of future scientists. As the event ended and the audience dispersed, Jamal remained at the front of the lecture hall, surrounded by his bacterial decomposition display and the awards he had received over the past year. The same project that had once triggered a national panic now represented everything beautiful about scientific inquiry, curiosity, persistence, innovation, and the power of knowledge to improve the world. Brandon Mitchell approached nervously, having driven down from Princeton specifically to attend the symposium. The two young men had never spoken directly, despite their mother's conflict having shaped both their lives in profound ways. "Jamal," Brandon said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "I wanted to apologize again for what my mother did to you, and to thank you for handling everything with so much dignity. You've taught me more about courage and integrity than any class or textbook ever could." Jamal looked up from his wheelchair, studying the face of the boy whose academic competition had somehow sparked a federal investigation. He saw genuine remorse, authentic growth, and the kind of moral development that only comes from confronting uncomfortable truths about family and privilege. "Brandon," he replied, extending his hand, "your mother's actions were her choice, not yours. What matters is how you've responded and what you've learned. We're both going to be scientists someday. Let's make sure we use that privilege to build bridges instead of walls." The handshake between the two teenagers represented more than personal reconciliation. It symbolized the possibility of healing after trauma, learning after ignorance, and progress after prejudice. The bacteria that had once been twisted into symbols of terrorism had instead become catalysts for positive change. breaking down the waste of hatred and fear to create rich soil for a more just and inclusive future. As Jamal wheeled out of the lecture hall that evening, surrounded by friends, family, and mentors who had supported him through the darkest period of his young life, he carried with him not just scientific knowledge, but hard-won wisdom about human nature, institutional bias, and the responsibility that comes with surviving public trauma. His bacteria would continue decomposing organic waste in laboratories across the country, while his story would continue inspiring young scientists to pursue their passions despite the obstacles they might face. The science fair crisis had ended not with the spectacular federal response that Karen Mitchell had triggered, but with quiet determination of a teenage scientist who refused to let fear and prejudice destroy his love of discovery. In the end, truth had decomposed the lies, evidence had broken down the accusations, and justice had transformed waste into wisdom exactly as Jamal's bacteria had been designed to do from the very beginning.